I thought this hearing was just a fight over a house or a bank account, but when my sister stood up too fast, treating our grandfather like inventory to be liquidated, I knew this was a hunt. I did not shake. I was ready for the moment they would expose themselves. When the doors opened and the man in the black suit walked in without looking at a single soul, I knew my grandfather's plan had just begun. My name is Ivera Clearfield, and I am 34 years old. I walked into the Briarwick probate court with the specific kind of posture you develop when you have spent a lifetime being the disappointment in a room full of predators. The courthouse in Caldwell Point, Oregon, did not smell like justice. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the damp, pine-heavy air that clung to everyone's coats this time of year. I carried a single, beige manila folder. It was thin. It contained 3 sheets of paper. To anyone watching, I looked unprepared. I looked like the lamb coming to a slaughter that had been scheduled weeks in advance, but they did not know the weight of what I was carrying. Paper is heavy not because of the wood pulp, but because of whose signature is at the bottom. The double doors swung open behind me, admitting a gust of air that was significantly more expensive than the air in the rest of the building. My sister, Maribel Clearfield Rhodes, had arrived. Maribel did not walk, she glided. She was wearing what the fashion magazines called quiet luxury. But in our family, we just called it armor. Her coat was a shade of camel that probably cost $4,000, draped over shoulders that had never carried a burden heavier than a socialite's grievance. There was no black. There was no mourning. In Maribel's world, wearing black was an admission of loss. And Maribel did not lose things. She acquired them. Her face was perfectly composed, her makeup done in natural tones that highlighted her high cheekbones. She offered a tight, polite nod to the bailiff, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a calculation, not a greeting. She looked at me for exactly 1 second, her eyes sweeping over my off-the-rack blazer, and then she looked away, dismissing me as a variable that had already been solved. Behind her came our parents, Dorian and Celeste Clearfield. They did not look like a grieving father and mother. They looked like the board of directors arriving for a hostile takeover. They sat in the row behind Maribel, their movements synchronized, silent, and terrifyingly united. My father adjusted his cufflinks. My mother smoothed her skirt. They did not look at me. To them, I was not their daughter today. I was a procedural hurdle. I was a clerical error that needed to be corrected before they could go to lunch at the country club. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Though technically, we were all just petitioners today. The wood of the table was cold under my fingertips. I kept my hands folded on top of my thin file. I did not fidget. I did not check my phone. I just breathed. Maribel's lawyer, Gage Huxley, was already arranging his papers. Gage was a man who wore suits that were tailored a little too tightly and smiled a little too widely. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to bulldoze a heritage site to build a parking lot and make it look like community service. He spread his documents out like a general laying out a battle map. His pile was thick affidavits, financial statements, character references, medical opinions. It was a fortress of paper designed to intimidate. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Vance. We all stood. The judge was a man in his 60s with a face carved out of granite and patience worn thin by 3 decades of family squabbles. He looked at the docket, then at us. He looked like he wanted this over with. "Please be seated," Judge Vance said. "We are here regarding the estate of Arthur Clearfield. I see a petition for the immediate appointment of Maribel Clearfield Rhodes as the executor and sole administrator." Gage Huxley stood up. His voice was smooth, a baritone practiced in courtrooms across the Pacific Northwest. "Good morning, Your Honor. Yes, we are moving for an immediate transfer of administrative powers to my client, Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes. Given the complexity of the estate, which includes real estate holdings in 3 counties, a significant portfolio of securities, and the family's legacy business, we believe time is of the essence." He paused, turning slightly to glance at me. It was a pitying look. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we respectfully submit that Miss Ivera Clearfield is not positioned to manage an estate of this magnitude. As outlined in our submitted affidavits, Ms. Clearfield has a history of employment instability and lacks the financial literacy required for such a fiduciary duty. We are trying to protect the integrity of the grandfather's legacy. We simply want to ensure the assets are preserved. It was a beautiful speech. It was clean. It was logical. It painted Maribel as the responsible, capable steward and me as the erratic, incapable sister who needed to be saved from herself. They weren't attacking me with anger. They were attacking me with concern. That was always their way. They would cut your throat and tell you they were just trying to help you breathe better. My mother, Celeste, let out a soft, audible sigh from the back row, a sound designed to convey long-suffering maternal exhaustion. It was a perfect performance. Judge Vance looked over his glasses at Gage. The argument seemed sound. In the eyes of the law, on paper, Maribel looked like the perfect candidate. She had the money, the status, and the connections. I had a job at a risk assessment lab that my family pretended didn't exist, and a rented apartment on the wrong side of the river. The judge turned his eyes to me. "Miss Clearfield," he said, "you are the other named potential beneficiary. Your sister is petitioning for full administrative control and immediate probate execution. Do you have an objection to this motion?" The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed, a low mechanical drone that felt like the countdown of a clock. Maribel leaned forward slightly. I could feel her anticipation radiating across the aisle. She was waiting for me to stammer. She was waiting for me to cry. She was waiting for me to launch into an emotional tirade about how they never loved me, about how unfair it all was. If I got emotional, I proved their point. If I got angry, I proved I was unstable. I stood up. My chair scraped slightly against the floor. A harsh sound in the quiet room. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Gage Huxley. I looked directly at Judge Vance. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I object." Maribel froze. This was not in the script. I was supposed to roll over, or I was supposed to scream. I was not supposed to stand there with a voice that didn't shake. Judge Vance raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds, Miss Clearfield? Do you contest your sister's qualifications? Do you have evidence of a competing will?" Gage Huxley was already half standing, ready to pounce on whatever foolish thing I was about to say. I did not answer the question immediately. I looked down at my thin file. I ran my thumb over the edge of the paper. I knew exactly what time it was. It was 9:47 in the morning. I am not contesting her qualifications based on the documents she has submitted. Your Honor, I said, my objection is procedural. Procedural. The judge sounded annoyed. Miss Clearfield, this is a probate hearing, not a delaying tactic. Unless you have a valid legal reason to halt this appointment, I am inclined to grant the motion. The assets need a manager. I took a breath. The air in the courtroom tasted stale, recycled 1,000 times. But to me, it felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I am requesting that the court pause for 5 minutes. I said. Maribel let out a sharp, derisive laugh before she could stop herself. Gage Huxley covered it with a cough. 5 minutes. Judge Vance asked. Why? Because, Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice flat and devoid of the emotion they wanted to see. We are missing the final person. I am asking the court to wait until the full party is present before signing any orders. Gage Huxley threw his hands up in a gesture of polite frustration. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The entire immediate family is here. The legal counsel is here. There is no final person. Mr. Arthur Clearfield is deceased. Unless Miss Clearfield is expecting a séance, this is a waste of the court's time. It is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we mentioned in our brief. My father, Dorian, leaned forward from the back row. His voice was a low rumble, meant to be a whisper but projected perfectly for the judge to hear. Always a scene. He muttered, She always has to make a scene. I heard him. I heard the disdain that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. I heard the certainty in his voice that I was nothing more than a nuisance, a fly buzzing around the heads of the important people. Maribel looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. She thought I was stalling. She thought I was desperate, trying to hold on to the edge of a cliff while they stomped on my fingers. She thought this was my last, pathetic stand before I fell into obscurity and let them take everything my grandfather had built. I looked back at her. I did not blink. She saw defiance. She saw stubbornness. But she did not see what was actually happening. I was not stalling. I was not playing for time because I was afraid of the gavel falling. I was checking the time because I knew the schedule. My grandfather, Arthur, had been a man who believed in precision. He believed that if you were going to catch a thief, you didn't shout at them from the porch. You left the door unlocked, you turned off the lights, and you waited in the dark with a camera. They thought I was holding up the proceedings. They did not understand that I was holding the door open. I looked at the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. I am not asking for a postponement. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of my family, I am asking you to wait because the paperwork you have in front of you is incomplete, and the person who has the rest of it just walked into the building. Maribel rolled her eyes. My mother shook her head, touching her forehead as if my stupidity gave her a migraine. Gage Huxley opened his mouth to move for a summary ruling, to crush me under the weight of his expensive vocabulary, but I just stood there, my hand resting on my thin folder. I wasn't fighting them, not yet. I was just the spotter. I was just the one holding the binoculars, watching the missile come in. My grandfather used to tell me that the loudest person in the room is the one with the most to lose, but the quietest person is the one with the longest memory. My family had spent 30 years talking over me. They had spent 30 years thinking that because I was quiet, I was weak. They thought they owned this room. They thought they owned the judge, the law, and the narrative. I looked at the clock. 9:49. The fuse was lit 3 weeks ago, the day my grandfather died. I had just been waiting for the spark to reach the powder, and then, just as Gage Huxley started to speak, the handle of the courtroom door turned. The door to the courtroom did not bang open. There was no dramatic gust of wind, no sudden hush falling over a crowd that was already holding its breath. The heavy oak door simply unlatched with a precise, metallic click, swinging inward on well-oiled hinges. The man who entered was not a character from a television drama. He was not handsome in the way Gage Huxley was handsome, nor was he imposing in the way my father tried to be. He was a man made entirely of geometry and silence. He wore a black suit that absorbed the fluorescent light of the courtroom rather than reflecting it. It was a suit that cost more than Maribel's car. But you would only know that if you knew exactly what to look for in the stitching of the lapel. He carried no briefcase. In his left hand, held against his side with a casual sort of security, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. His name was Silas Mercer. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the judge. He certainly did not look at my sister, Maribel, who had turned in her seat, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in confusion. To Silas Mercer, the people in this room were not human beings with stories or grievances. We were merely coordinates on a grid that he had been hired to navigate. He walked down the center aisle. His shoes made a rhythmic, solid sound on the linoleum floor. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down. Though only I knew what 0 hour looked like, Maribel leaned toward her lawyer, whispering something sharp and urgent. Gage Huxley frowned. Turning to watch the man approach, I saw Gage's eyes drop to the man's suit, then to his shoes, and I saw the moment of recognition. Gage was a shark in a small pond, but he knew what an orca looked like. He stiffened. Silas Mercer stopped at the wooden gate that separated the public seating from the legal arena. He pushed it open without breaking his stride. He walked past the defense table where my family sat. He walked past the plaintiff's table where I sat. He did not stop until he was standing directly in front of the court clerk's desk, situated just below the judge's elevated bench. Only then did he speak. His voice was not loud, but it had the acoustic quality of a stone dropping into a deep well. For the record, he said. He turned slightly, pivoting on his heel to face me. For the first time, he made eye contact. His eyes were gray and completely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who had read 1,000 wills and seen 1,000 families tear each other apart, and had decided that paper was the only thing worth respecting. "Miss Vera Clearfield," he said. It was an acknowledgement. It was a verification. He was confirming that the asset me was present. He turned back to the clerk and placed the cream-colored envelope on the desk. He set it down with deliberate care, aligning the edges of the envelope with the edge of the desk. The sound of the paper touching the wood was soft, a whisper of friction that seemed louder than a scream in the quiet room. I watched Maribel's eyes lock onto the envelope, on the back. Sealed in dark blue wax that looked almost black, was an emblem. Even from where she sat, she could read the embossed lettering on the linen paper. Cobalt Ridge Trust and Fiduciary. The name sucked the oxygen out of the room. Cobalt Ridge was not a local bank. It was not the kind of place where you opened a checking account or applied for a mortgage. It was a private trust company, a fortress of wealth management that existed solely to protect capital from taxes, creditors, and, most specifically, greedy relatives. It was an entity that did not exist in the real world of Caldwell Point, but in this room, it loomed like a skyscraper. Judge Vance adjusted his glasses. He looked at Silas Mercer, then at the envelope, and then at the docket in front of him. The irritation he had felt moments ago regarding my request for a delay evaporated, replaced by the sharp, alert wariness of a man who realizes the ground has just shifted beneath his feet. Identity. Judge Vance asked. Silas Mercer reached into his inner pocket and produced a business card, sliding it across the wood to the judge. Silas Mercer, Senior Trust Officer, Cobalt Ridge, he said. I am here representing the interests of the Arthur Clearfield Revocable Living Trust, which, as of 8:16 in the morning 3 weeks ago, became the Arthur Clearfield Irrevocable Trust. The word irrevocable hung in the air. It was a heavy final word. It meant unchangeable. It meant locked. It meant that whatever Maribel thought she was doing here today, she was 3 weeks too late. Judge Vance picked up the envelope. He reached for his letter opener. The sound of the heavy paper being slit open was like the tearing of a muscle. Maribel shifted in her seat, the leather creaking. My mother, Celeste, put a hand on my father's arm. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw working, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The judge withdrew the documents. They were bound in blue legal backing. He began to read. The courtroom remained silent for a long time. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Judge Vance turned a page, then another. The only sound was the rustle of high-quality bond paper. Gage Huxley could not take it anymore. He stood up, smoothing his tie, trying to regain control of a room he had lost the moment Silas walked in. Your Honor, he said, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual. We have not been served with copies of whatever this is. My client is the presumptive executor under the last known will, if this is a competing testament. We demand the right to examine it for authenticity immediately. We have concerns about undue influence. Sit down. Mr. Huxley. Judge Vance did not look up from the document. He did not raise his voice. He simply issued the command with the flat authority of a man reading a verdict. Gage froze. His mouth opened and closed. Your Honor, I must insist I said sit down. The judge repeated, this time looking over the rim of his glasses. The look he gave Gage was not one of annoyance. It was one of warning. You are arguing for jurisdiction over assets that do not exist in this probate court. Maribel gasped. It was a short, sharp intake of breath. Judge Vance turned a page, then looked up at the room. He looked at Maribel, then he looked at my parents. Finally, he looked at me. This document, the judge said, speaking slowly and clearly, is a certification of trust, accompanied by a pour-over will. It appears that Mr. Arthur Clearfield transferred the title of all his real property, his securities, his liquid assets, and his business interests into the trust approximately 6 months ago. He paused to let the legal reality sink in. This court, the judge continued, handles the probate of individuals. But Arthur Clearfield died owning nothing. His car, his house, his accounts, they belong to the trust, and the trust does not die. Therefore, There is no estate for you to administer, Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes. Maribel's face went pale. The quiet luxury drained right out of her, but she started, her voice trembling. But I am the eldest. The family grandfather wouldn't. The judge ignored her and looked at Silas Mercer, and the successor trustee. Judge Vance asked. Silas Mercer stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The sole successor trustee is Cobalt Ridge Trust and Fiduciary. Silas said, We have accepted the appointment. We have secured the assets. The management is entirely corporate. There is no family member named as a co-trustee or advisor. This was the first knife twist. My grandfather hadn't just cut them out. He had replaced them with a machine. He knew that if he left me in charge, they would bully me, sue me, and harass me until I broke. So he didn't leave me in charge. He left a corporation in charge. You cannot bully a corporation. You cannot guilt-trip a logo. You cannot make a trust officer cry at Thanksgiving dinner. Gage Huxley was reading the writing on the wall, but he was desperate. He grabbed the edge of the table. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We have witnesses who will testify to Mr. Clearfield's declining mental state 6 months ago. If he signed these documents under duress, or if he lacked capacity, then the trust is invalid, and the assets revert to the probate estate. We move to open discovery regarding the creation of this instrument. I watched Silas Mercer. He did not smile. He barely moved. He simply nodded at the judge, indicating a specific paragraph on the 3rd page of the document. Judge Vance followed the gesture. He read the paragraph. His eyebrows shot up. He looked at Gage, and then he looked directly at Maribel. The look was pitying. It was the look you give a gambler who has just pushed their life savings onto the table on a bad hand. Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, the judge said, before your counsel travels any further down this road, I am ethically bound to ask you a question. Are you aware of the specific terms of this trust regarding legal challenges? Maribel blinked. What the document contains a no-contest clause, also known as an in terrorem clause, the judge said. It is quite specific. I'm going to read it to you. The judge cleared his throat. If any beneficiary under this trust, directly or indirectly, contests the validity of this trust, or attacks the capacity of the grantor, or seeks to alter the administrative terms through legal action, that beneficiary shall be deemed to have predeceased the grantor. They shall forfeit their entire share, and their portion shall be distributed as if they did not exist. The silence that followed was absolute. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Huxley has just stated on the record that he intends to challenge the validity of the trust based on mental capacity. If he files that motion, Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, and if he loses which, given that this trust was notarized by 2 witnesses and accompanied by a contemporaneous medical certificate of capacity, is a distinct possibility you will receive nothing. 0. The judge paused. Not a reduced share. Nothing. Maribel looked at Gage. Her eyes were wide, panic finally breaking through the Botox and the composure. She had come here to take it all. She had come here believing the worst that could happen was that she would have to share a small percentage with me. She had never imagined a scenario where she walked away with empty pockets. Gage Huxley looked like he had just swallowed a stone. He slowly sat down. He realized he was standing on a landmine. Judge Vance looked at the family. So, the judge said softly, do you still wish to proceed with your motion to challenge the competency of the deceased, my father? Dorian spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse. This is absurd. He was my father. We have a right to, sir. The judge cut him off. You have a right to remain silent unless you want to bankrupt your daughter. The trust owns the house you are sitting in. The trust owns the accounts you are undoubtedly using to pay Mr. Huxley. If you trigger that clause, the trust closes its doors to you. I sat very still. My hands were still folded on my thin file. I felt a strange, cold vibration in my chest. It wasn't joy. Joy is warm. This was satisfaction. It was the click of a lock tumbling into place. I looked at Maribel. She was staring at the judge, her mouth slightly open. She looked like a child who had been told that Santa Claus was actually a debt collector. I turned my head slightly to look at Silas Mercer. He was already packing up. He had delivered the payload. His job was done. He didn't care about Maribel's shock. He didn't care about my father's indignation. He was just the courier for the dead. I looked back at the judge. I did not bring tears to this courtroom. I did not bring stories about how mean my sister was when we were children. I did not bring emotional appeals. I brought a contract. My grandfather knew them. He knew them better than they knew themselves. He knew that their greed was predictable. He knew that Maribel would rush to court. He knew that Gage would attack his mind, and he had built a trap that used their own momentum against them. Judge Vance looked at me. "Miss Clearfield," he said, "it seems the administration of this estate is outside my purview, provided the trust is valid." "Do you have any comment?" I stood up slowly. I picked up my thin file. "No, Your Honor." I said, "I believe the documents speak for themselves." I sat down. Maribel turned to look at me. Her eyes were filled with a hate so pure it felt like a physical heat. She knew, in that moment, she knew that I wasn't just a spectator. She knew I had known, but she couldn't scream. She couldn't yell, because Silas Mercer was standing there, and the ghost of my grandfather was standing right behind him, holding a match, waiting for her to make one wrong move so he could burn her inheritance to the ground. The judge began to gather his papers. Petition denied. Judge Vance said, "The court recognizes the authority of the Cobalt Ridge Trust." He banged his gavel. It was a sharp, wooden sound, but it wasn't the end. I watched my sister's hands curl into fists on the table. I saw the look she exchanged with my mother. I saw the way Gage Huxley was already whispering in her ear, his hand covering his mouth. They weren't going to stop. They couldn't stop. They were just going to change the battlefield. And I was ready for that, too, because the file in front of me wasn't empty. And the envelope Silas Mercer had delivered was just the first one. There were two more. The gavel had barely settled on the wooden block when the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from shock to a desperate, clawing reconfiguration. The silence that followed Judge Vance's warning about the no contest clause was heavy, but it was not permanent. My family was not the type to surrender. They were the type to renegotiate the terms of reality until it suited them. Gage Huxley did not sit down. He remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. He was a man accustomed to bullying assets out of the hands of widows and orphans, and he was not about to let a single piece of paper humiliate him in front of a client who paid his retainer in six-figure installments. He took a breath, smoothing the front of his jacket, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He realized he could not attack the mental capacity of my grandfather without triggering the clause that would strip Maribel of everything. So, he changed targets. If they could not say Arthur Clearfield was crazy, they would say he was a hostage. "Your Honor," Gage began, his voice dropping to a register of deep, performative concern. "We understand the severity of the document you have just read. We respect the wisdom of the court. However, the existence of this trust does not negate the context in which it was created. We are not contesting Mr. Clearfield's capacity. We are asserting that the capacity he had was commandeered. We are asserting undue influence." He turned to point a manicured finger directly at me. "Miss Ivera, Clearfield spent the last 6 months of her grandfather's life acting as his primary gatekeeper. She lived in his home. She managed his schedule. She controlled his phone. We believe she systematically isolated a vulnerable elderly man from his loving family for the sole purpose of securing this exact outcome. The trust is valid on paper. Yes, but it is the fruit of a poisoned tree. It was a smart pivot. It was vicious. And it was entirely fabricated. But it was smart. Maribel let out a small, strangled sound, pressing a tissue to eyes that were perfectly dry. She looked up at the judge, her face a portrait of sisterly betrayal. "I just wanted to see him," she whispered, her voice carrying perfectly to the back of the room. "I called every week. She never let me through. She told me he was sleeping. She told me he was angry. I didn't know. I didn't know she was making him sign things. My mother, Celeste, decided it was her turn to enter the stage. She leaned forward, clutching her purse as if it contained the ashes of her happiness rather than her platinum credit cards. "She stole him," Celeste said, her voice trembling with an emotion that might have been mistaken for grief if you didn't know her. "She stole my father from us. We thought she was caring for him. We trusted her. We thought she was finally taking responsibility. But she was just predatory." I sat there and let the words hit me. They were designed to hurt. They were designed to trigger a reaction, to make me scream, to make me deny it, to make me look like the unstable daughter they had always claimed I was. But I had spent 34 years building an immunity to their poison. I remembered the nights I sat by my grandfather's bed while he coughed until his chest rattled, checking his oxygen levels, holding his hand when the morphine nightmares came. I remembered checking my phone and seeing Instagram stories of Maribel at wine tastings in Napa and my parents on a cruise in the Mediterranean. They hadn't called. They hadn't visited. They waited until he was dead to care about his schedule. My father, Dorian, did not use emotion. That was not his brand. He cleared his throat, sitting up straighter, adjusting his tie. He spoke to the judge like one CEO speaking to another about a problematic mid-level manager. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cold and flat. "This is not about feelings. This is about risk management. Ivera has a history of financial instability. She has bounced between jobs. She has no assets of her own, a woman in her position, given access to an estate of this magnitude, had every motive to manipulate the situation. She is a risk. She is unstable. We are not trying to take the money for ourselves. We are trying to prevent a historic family legacy from being squandered by a person who does not understand the burden of wealth." I looked at my father. He didn't look back. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was a bad investment. I was a liability on the balance sheet that needed to be written off. Gage Huxley sensed the momentum building. He gestured to the back of the courtroom. "We have witnesses. Your Honor, family members who can attest to the isolation." 2 people stood up in the back row. I recognized them immediately, though I had not seen them in 5 years. They were cousins from Riverton Hollow, a town 2 hours away. Their names snagged on my memory, Elias and Brenda. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Elias was wearing a suit that was too large for him, clearly bought for a different occasion, perhaps a funeral or a job interview he didn't get. Brenda was clutching a handbag that looked like a knockoff of the one Maribel was wearing. They stood there like props. It was obvious they had been flown in, put up in a nice hotel, and promised a slice of the pie if they just nodded at the right time. They were the chorus line in Maribel's tragedy. Judge Vance looked at the cousins, then back at Gage. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man who had seen this play performed by better actors. "Mr. Huxley," the judge said, his voice dry, "you are making serious accusations. You are accusing the petitioner of elder abuse and coercive control. Do you have a police report?" Gage blinked. "Excuse me, a police report." Judge Vance repeated, "Or a report from Adult Protective Services. If Mr. Clearfield was being held prisoner in his own home, surely a family as concerned as yours would have contacted the authorities. Surely you have a record of a welfare check." Gage shifted his stance. "Well, Your Honor, as you know, families often try to handle these matters privately. So, no police report." The judge said, "Do you have medical records indicating Mr. Clearfield was in a state of suggestibility? Do you have a statement from his primary care physician stating that he was being isolated against his medical advice?" "We are in the process of gathering." Gage started. "Stop," the judge said. He leaned back in his leather chair. "You are throwing words like predatory and unstable around this courtroom without a shred of documentary evidence. You have 2 distant cousins standing in the back who look like they would rather be anywhere else, and you have the testimony of 3 people who stand to lose a fortune if this trust is valid. I am requesting discovery, Your Honor," Gage said, his voice getting louder, more desperate. "We need access to Miss Clearfield's phone records, her emails, and the visitor logs of the residents for the last 6 months. We need to depose the drafting attorney. We need to see the timeline. If we can prove she blocked our calls, if we can prove she filtered his mail, that is grounds for undue influence. Judge Vance looked at him over the top of his spectacles. Discovery is a tool for finding facts. Mr. Huxley, it is not a fishing license. You cannot file a lawsuit based on a hunch and then ask for permission to rummage through the defendant's life until you find a reason to justify it. The judge turned his gaze to the man in the black suit standing quietly by the clerk's desk. Silas Mercer had not moved. He had watched the family's performance with the detached interest of a biologist observing bacteria in a petri dish. Mr. Mercer, Judge Vance said, address the court regarding the creation of the trust. Silas nodded. He didn't need to consult notes. He knew the file. Mr. Arthur Clearfield contacted Cobalt Ridge 8 months ago, Silas stated. His voice cut through the emotional haze of the room like a scalpel. He requested a private consultation. We sent a car to pick him up. He came to our offices alone. He met with our senior estate planning counsel alone. We recorded the sessions, as is our protocol for high net worth revisions. Silas turned his gray eyes toward Maribel. During those sessions, Mr. Clearfield was explicitly asked about his family. He was asked if he felt pressured. He was asked if anyone had directed him to make these changes. He spoke at length about his reasons. He was lucid, he was specific, and he was adamant. The drafting attorney was independent. Miss Ivera Clearfield was not present, nor was she in the building. We have the security logs to prove it. Maribel's face tightened. The narrative of me whispering in my grandfather's ear while he signed papers at the kitchen table was dissolving, but the biggest blow was yet to come. Judge Vance picked up the blue-backed document again. He flipped to the back, where a separate, thinner sheaf of papers was stapled. Mr. Huxley, the judge said, you mentioned that you wanted to see a timeline. You wanted to know if Miss Clearfield blocked your client's access. Yes, Your Honor, Gage said, seeing a glimmer of hope. It seems the deceased anticipated this exact argument, the judge said. He pulled a specific page from the file. The room went deadly quiet. Mr. Mercer has included an exhibit here, the judge continued. It is a notarized log of events, dictated by Arthur Clearfield and transcribed by Cobalt Ridge staff over the last 6 months. My heart skipped a beat. I knew about the log, but I didn't know it was in the courtroom. I looked at Maribel. Her skin, usually a perfect porcelain, had taken on a grayish cast. The judge adjusted his reading glasses. Entry dated October 14th. The judge read aloud. Maribel called today. She did not ask how I was feeling. She asked if I had sold the lake house yet. When I told her I wasn't selling, she hung up. Duration of call 2 minutes. Maribel flinched as if she had been slapped. Entry dated November 3rd. The judge continued, his voice monotone and devastating. Dorian came by. He didn't come inside. He sat in his car in the driveway and honked until Ivera went out. He gave her a stack of papers for me to sign regarding the voting shares of the company. I told Ivera to burn them. She refused. She put them in the drawer. Dorian yelled at her, called her useless. I watched from the window. My father stiffened. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than disdain in his eyes. I saw caution. Entry dated December 24th. Christmas Eve. The judge read, waited for Celeste to call. The phone did not ring. Ivera made roast chicken. We watched old movies. At 10 o'clock, I asked Ivera to check if the phone was working. It was working perfectly. The judge lowered the paper. He looked at my mother. Celeste was no longer crying. She was staring at the table, her hand gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were yellow. The performance of the grieving daughter had been shattered by the voice of the dead man himself. This log goes on for 40 pages, Judge Vance said. It details every interaction, every lack of interaction, and every demand for money. It seems, Mr. Huxley, that your client was not isolated. She was simply absent, and when she was present, she was transactional. Gage Huxley looked at the papers in the judge's hand as if they were radioactive. He realized he had just walked his client into a trap. By asking for a timeline, he had gotten one, just not the one he wanted. Maribel stood up. It was an involuntary motion, a spasm of panic. "That's not true," she stammered. He was confused. He was old. He wrote what she told him to write. "Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes," the judge snapped. "Sit down. You are treading dangerously close to accusing the court of accepting falsified evidence. These logs were notarized. They were witnessed by third parties at the trust company." Maribel sat down slowly. She looked at me, and in that moment, the dynamic in the room inverted. For 34 years, Maribel had been the predator, and I had been the prey. She had the money, the looks, the approval, the power, but right now, she was stripped naked in a room full of strangers. She realized that while she was busy posing for photos and curating her life, our grandfather had been watching. He had been taking notes, and he had given those notes to me. I looked back at her. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just looked at her with the same flat, tired expression I had worn for years. The judge looked at Gage. "Motion for discovery is denied." Judge Vance ruled, "The trust stands as the governing instrument. The accusations of undue influence are dismissed for lack of merit and for being directly contradicted by the evidence provided by the independent trustee." Gage Huxley slumped in his chair. He was checking his mental Rolodex for an exit strategy. He needed to get his client out of this room before she lost more than just the estate. He needed to stop the bleeding, but the bleeding had only just started. Silas Mercer stepped forward again. "Your Honor," he said. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. There is one more matter regarding the conduct of the beneficiaries," Silas said. Maribel's head snapped up. She looked terrified. She wasn't afraid of me anymore. She wasn't afraid of the judge. She was afraid of the man in the black suit and the endless supply of envelopes he seemed to possess. "What matter?" the judge asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out an envelope this time. He pulled out a small, silver flash drive. "The trust has reason to believe that there have been attempts to access the liquid assets of the estate digitally," Silas said. "Attempts that occurred after the time of death, using passwords that were obtained improperly. The room went so cold you could have stored meat in it. I saw my father close his eyes. I saw Maribel stop breathing. They thought the battle was about the will. They thought it was a civil matter. They didn't realize that my grandfather hadn't just prepared a legal defense. He had prepared a criminal one, and now the real hunt was about to begin." The silver flash drive sat on the clerk's desk like a bullet casing, small and cold and devastating. The silence in the courtroom was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum, where all the oxygen had been sucked out by the sudden, terrifying gravity of Silas Mercer's accusation. My family had expected a civil dispute. They were prepared for arguments about fairness and legacy. They were not prepared for forensic data. But Silas was not done. He reached into his jacket again. This time, he did not produce a piece of technology. He produced a second envelope. It was identical to the first one, cream linen. Heavy stock. Sealed with that impenetrable dark blue wax. But the label on this one was different. It did not say last will and testament. It did not say certification of trust. It was hand-lettered in ink that I recognized immediately. It was my grandfather's handwriting, spiky, deliberate, and firm. Statement of intent. The envelope read, "To be opened only in the event of a dispute." Silas placed it on the judge's desk, right next to the flash drive. "This document," Silas said, his voice devoid of theatricality, "is a personal addendum. Mr. Clearfield instructed us to file it into the court record only if the family attempted to characterize his decisions as the product of dementia or manipulation. Given the motion, Mr. Huxley just argued, the condition has been met." Judge Vance picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. The sound was a sharp snap in the quiet room. He unfolded the letter. It was handwritten. My grandfather had not typed it. He had wanted them to see the pressure of the pen on the page. He had wanted them to see that his hand had not shaken. The judge began to read aloud. To the presiding judge, The letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am dead. It also means that my daughter, Maribel, and my son, Dorian, are currently sitting in your courtroom trying to rob my estate by destroying the reputation of my granddaughter. Ivera. Maribel let out a gasp that sounded like a hiccup. She pressed a hand to her mouth. My mother, Celeste, looked down at her lap, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. I am writing this on the night of November 12th. The judge continued reading. I am writing this because tonight, I realize that my family does not see me as a father or a grandfather. They see me as an obstacle to a wire transfer. November 12th. The date hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I remembered November 12th. I was working a double shift at the Orchard Line Risk Lab. The air in the lab always smelled of ozone and antiseptic cleaner. I remembered the hum of the servers and the blue light of the monitors. I had been scheduled to leave at 6 in the evening, but at 5:30, my phone had buzzed. It was a text from my grandfather. Don't come home yet. The text had said, stay at work until 10. I have a headache. I want to sleep. I had felt a pang of guilt. I thought I had annoyed him. I thought he needed space from me. So I stayed. I sat in the break room and ate a vending machine sandwich and wondered if I was a burden to him. I wondered if I was failing him. I looked up at the judge, my vision blurring slightly. I hadn't been annoying him. He had been protecting me. Judge Vance continued reading, his voice steady but carrying a new edge of hardness. Tonight, at 7 o'clock. My daughter Maribel arrived at my door. The letter said, she did not come alone. She brought a man named Mr. Lawton. She introduced him as a friend, but I saw the stamp in his briefcase. He was a mobile notary. She also brought a prepared document. It was a power of attorney, granting her immediate control over my medical decisions and my banking access. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Maribel was shaking her head frantically, her eyes wide and wet, silently pleading with the air to stop the words coming out of the judge's mouth. It was raining. The letter continued. I told them to leave. Maribel told me that I was confused. She told me that Ivera was stealing from me. She told me that if I did not sign the paper, the state would come and put me in a home, and Ivera would be arrested. She tried to use my fear for my granddaughter to force my hand. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't care. All those times Maribel had told me I was useless. All those times she had looked at me with pity. She had been using my name as a weapon against the only person who loved me. I told her no. The judge read, I told her to get out of my house. She refused. She sat at my kitchen table and told Mr. Lawton to prepare his seal. She said, he will sign it eventually. We just have to wait. Judge Vance paused. He looked up from the letter and stared directly at Gage Huxley. Gage was staring at the table, his face the color of ash. He knew what this was. This wasn't just family drama. This was imprisonment. This was coercion. So I did the only thing I could do. The letter went on. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower so they would think I was bathing. And then I called the emergency line of the Cobalt Ridge Trust. Silas Mercer nodded slightly. I spoke to Mr. Mercer, the letter said. I told him there were intruders in my home attempting to force a signature. Mr. Mercer kept me on the line. He recorded the call. He heard Maribel pounding on the bathroom door. He heard her screaming that I was a senile old fool. He heard it all. Maribel stood up. He's lying, she screamed. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. He was paranoid. He didn't know what was happening. I was trying to help him. He was having an episode. Sit down, Judge Vance bellowed. His gavel struck the block with a force that made the water pitcher rattle. Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, you will sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed in handcuffs. Maribel collapsed back into her chair, sobbing into her hands. But it wasn't the sobbing of grief. It was the sobbing of a child who has been caught holding the matches while the curtains are on fire. Judge Vance looked back at the letter. I stayed in the bathroom for 45 minutes. The letter concluded. Eventually, Mr. Lawton, the notary, grew uncomfortable. I heard him tell Maribel that he could not notarize a signature under these conditions. They left at 8:15. I came out. I wrote this letter, and then I texted Ivera to come home, but I told her to wait until 10 because I needed time to stop shaking. I did not want her to see me afraid. I covered my mouth with my hand. I remembered coming home that night. I remembered finding him sitting in his armchair, a cup of tea in his hand. He had smiled at me. He had asked me about my day. He hadn't told me a thing. He had swallowed his terror so I wouldn't have to taste it. Judge Vance lowered the letter. He looked at Maribel with an expression of utter revulsion. "You claimed," the judge said, his voice quiet and dangerous, "that your father was confused. You claimed that Miss Clearfield was the one isolating him. It was a misunderstanding." Gage Huxley stammered. He was trying to salvage the wreckage. "Your Honor, Mr. Clearfield was clearly in a state of high agitation. His perception of events—" "Stop." Judge Vance cut him off. He reached for the file again. He pulled out a document that had been attached to the capacity certificate. "This letter refers to an audio recording." The judge said, "Mr. Mercer, does this recording exist?" "Yes, Your Honor," Silas said. "It is on the drive, along with the time-stamped log of the call. And," the judge continued, looking at a spreadsheet in the file, "there is a supplemental file here. It appears Mr. Clearfield was very thorough. He didn't just document the emotional abuse, he documented the numbers." The judge held up a page filled with rows of data. "This is a comparison log." Judge Vance said, "On the left are the withdrawals from Mr. Clearfield's personal checking account. On the right are the dates of Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes's visits." He scanned the page. November 12th, visit recorded. November 13th, attempted transfer of $5,000 initiated from an IP address registered to a device named Maribel's iPhone. Maribel stopped crying. She went completely still. December 2nd. The judge read, "Visit recorded. December 2nd. A check for $2,000 cashed. Signature flagged as irregular by the bank, but cleared because it was under the fraud limit." The judge looked at Gage. "This isn't a probate case, Mr. Huxley," Judge Vance said. "This is a grand larceny case wrapped in a mourning veil." Gage Huxley leaned close to Maribel. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw his lips move. He was whispering fast, urgent words. He was telling her to shut up. He was telling her that they had walked into a bear trap, and that if she said one more word, she wasn't just losing the money, she was going to lose her liberty. Maribel looked at him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She looked at her parents. Dorian and Celeste were staring straight ahead, statues of denial. They were already distancing themselves. They were already rewriting the narrative in their heads. Maribel went too far. We didn't know. We were just concerned parents. They were cutting her loose to save themselves. Judge Vance stacked the papers together. He aligned the edges with a sharp, percussive tap on the desk. "Mr. Huxley," the judge said, "regarding your motion for discovery and your petition to remove the trust, we withdraw the motion." "Your Honor," Gage said quickly. "Oh, no," Judge Vance said. "You do not get to withdraw. You filed a motion in my court accusing a young woman of elder abuse. You dragged her reputation through the mud. You wasted the court's time with a frivolous claim grounded in malice and supported by perjury." The judge picked up his pen. "I am denying your motion with prejudice." Judge Vance said, "That means you cannot file it again, ever." He wrote something on the docket sheet, his pen scratching loudly in the silence. "Furthermore," the judge said, looking up, "I am setting a hearing for sanctions against you, Mr. Huxley, and your client. I want a full explanation of why you filed this petition when you knew or should have known about the events of November 12th. I want to know why you brought 2 witnesses to this court to lie, and I am referring the minutes of this hearing, along with the contents of that flash drive and this letter, to the district attorney's office for review." Maribel made a sound like a wounded animal. "Ivera," Gage whispered, turning to me. He looked desperate now. He looked like a man trying to sell a life jacket on a sinking ship. "Miss Clearfield." Surely this is family. We can discuss this. We can come to an arrangement. I looked at him. I looked at my sister. I looked at the parents who had sat there and watched her try to destroy me. I thought about the night of November 12th. I thought about my grandfather locking himself in a bathroom, shaking with fear, while Maribel pounded on the door. I thought about him sitting in the dark, waiting for me to come home, protecting me from the truth so I could have one more night of peace. I looked at Gage Huxley. I have nothing to say to you. I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. My grandfather did the talking for me. I turned to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Vance nodded at me. There was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He understood. He had seen a lot of greed in this room, a lot of hate. But today, he had seen love. He had seen a love so fierce it had reached out from the grave to slap my sister across the face. This hearing is adjourned pending the sanctions review, Judge Vance said. He banged the gavel, but as the sound echoed, I knew it wasn't over. Maribel wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at her phone. She was typing furiously under the table. Her face was pale, but her eyes were frantic. She had lost the legal battle. The trust was locked. The judge was against her. The DA was looming, but Maribel didn't know how to lose. When she couldn't win by the rules, she broke the board. I saw her hit send. And a second later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It wasn't a text from her. It was an alert. Security warning. The screen read, attempted login from unrecognized device. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. The judge thought he had ended it with a gavel. But my grandfather knew better. That was why there was a third envelope. I looked at Silas Mercer. He was watching Maribel, too. He saw the phone. He saw the frantic typing. He didn't look surprised. He just reached for his briefcase and prepared to unleash the rest of the storm. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut behind us, sealing away the judge, the stenographer, and the suffocating silence of the legal proceedings. The moment the latch clicked, the atmosphere in the hallway changed instantly. Inside, my family had been performing a tragedy for an audience of one. Out here, in the long, marble-lined corridor of the Briarwick County Courthouse, the stage lights were off, and the masks came down with a terrifying speed. The air in the hallway was cooler, smelling of floor wax and the lingering, metallic scent of rain on wool coats. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the exit when the sound of high heels striking the stone floor accelerated behind me. It was a sharp, aggressive staccato. Ivera. It was my mother. Celeste. She did not sound like the grieving daughter anymore. She sounded like a shareholder who had just been told her dividends were canceled. She moved fast, her hand reaching out to grab my elbow. Her grip was tight, the nails digging into the fabric of my blazer. You look at me, she hissed. Her face was flushed. The makeup she had carefully applied to look pale and sympathetic, now cracking around the edges of her rage. You look at me when I am speaking to you. Do you have any idea what you have done? I stopped. I did not pull my arm away immediately. I let her hold it. I wanted to feel the tremor in her hand. It was the vibration of a woman losing control. I looked at her. I have done nothing. Mother, I said. My voice was calm, which I knew would infuriate her more. Nothing. She choked out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. You humiliated us. You sat there and let that man read those lies about your sister. You let him paint your father as a villain. You have destroyed this family. Ivera. For what? For money. Is that what you wanted? You wanted to be the rich one. I looked at her eyes. They were blue, like mine, but they were shallow. There was no depth to them, only a surface reflection of her own needs. I didn't destroy the family, I said, pulling my arm free with a slow, deliberate motion. I just stopped lying for it. Grandfather didn't write those letters because of me. He wrote them because of you. I didn't lock the doors, Mother. I just opened the safe where you tried to hide the truth. Maribel stepped up beside her. She had recovered from her sobbing fit in the courtroom with miraculous speed. The tears were gone. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. She stood too close to me, invading my personal space. her scent of expensive jasmine and sandalwood cloying in the narrow hall. "You think you are so smart," Maribel whispered. Her voice was low, meant only for me. She didn't want the bailiff standing 30 feet away to hear. "You think because you have a trust officer in a cheap suit and a piece of paper that you have won, you think a bank account makes you safe." I looked at her. I saw the vein pulsing in her neck. "It is not about the bank account, Maribel," I said. "It is about the fact that for the first time in your life, you cannot charm or buy your way out of a consequence." Maribel smiled. It was a thin, terrifying smile. It was the smile of a person who has decided that if they cannot win the game, they will burn the board. "You have no idea who you are messing with." She said, "You think the judge matters? You think the law matters? This is Caldwell Point. We built this town. We know people you don't even know exist. You are going to wish you had just signed that power of attorney that night. You are going to wish you had never walked into this building." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't look at it. She held it against her side, the screen facing her thigh. But I saw her thumb move. She was swiping. She was tapping. It was a rhythmic, practiced motion. I remembered the alert I had received just moments ago inside the courtroom. Attempted login from unrecognized device. She wasn't just threatening me. She was executing something, right here, right in front of me. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her that I knew what she was doing, but a hand settled on the small of my back. It was a warm, heavy weight. It was solid. I didn't flinch. I knew that touch. Francis Glenbrook, my husband, stepped into the circle. He hadn't been sitting with me at the plaintiff's table. He had been in the back row, silent, observing, invisible. That was how we planned it. He was the variable they always forgot to calculate. Francis was not a man who wore suits often. He was a structural engineer. He understood load-bearing walls and stress fractures. He understood that things break when you apply pressure to the wrong place. He wore a dark gray jacket and a white shirt. No tie. He looked at Maribel, then at my mother. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Is there a problem here?" Francis asked. His voice was deep and level. My father, Dorian, stepped forward. He had been standing a few feet back, talking to Gage Huxley, but the presence of Francis seemed to offend him more than the loss of the estate. To Dorian, Francis was the mistake I had made 5 years ago. He was the man with the state school degree and the calloused hands who had taken his daughter away from the country club circuit. "You," Dorian said, looking at Francis with pure disdain. "You don't belong in this conversation. This is a family matter." Francis looked at Dorian. He didn't blink. "I am her family," Francis said. "You are just her relatives. There is a difference, and judging by what just happened in that room, you are barely that." Dorian's face turned purple. "You have no right, I have every right," Francis said, cutting him off. "I am the one who held her while she cried because you forgot her birthday for 10 years in a row. I am the one who drove Arthur to his chemotherapy appointments while you were playing golf. So do not talk to me about belonging. Dorian, I belong to the truth. You belong to a tax bracket." Dorian took a step back, stunned. He wasn't used to people speaking to him without fear. He was used to employees. He was used to subordinates. He didn't know how to handle a man who didn't want anything from him. Gage Huxley suddenly grabbed Maribel's arm. The lawyer looked sick. His face was pale, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the papers in his hand. "Maribel, we need to go," Gage said, his voice urgent. "Not yet." Maribel snapped, shaking him off. She was still staring at me, her thumb still working on the phone screen. "I am not done with her." "You are done," Gage hissed. He pulled her harder this time, physically dragging her a step away from me. "You don't understand. I just reread the clause. The forfeiture isn't pending a verdict. It is triggered by the filing of a contest without probable cause." Maribel froze. She looked at him. What she said. "We filed the motion," Gage whispered, but in the echoing hallway, it sounded like a shout. "We put it on the record. If the judge upholds the trust, you have already lost. The asset transfer stops. The freeze is immediate. Maribel looked at me. The arrogance flickered for a second, replaced by a flash of pure, cold panic. She realized that while she was busy making threats, the ground had already opened up beneath her feet. But then, the panic vanished. It was replaced by something darker. Resolve. "If I have lost," she said softly, staring at me with eyes that looked like black glass, "then I have nothing left to lose. Do I?" She looked down at her phone. She swiped one last time, a deliberate, final motion. Then she turned the phone over and slipped it into her pocket. "Ivera," Francis said, his voice low near my ear. "Don't react." I looked past Maribel's shoulder. Through the glass panels of the courtroom doors, I could see the interior. The session was over, but Judge Vance was still on the bench. A court clerk had just walked up to him. The clerk handed the judge a small slip of paper. I saw the judge take the paper. He read it. He frowned. He looked up. He didn't look at the files. He looked through the glass doors. He looked directly at Maribel. It was a look of scrutiny. It was the look a man gives when he realizes a crime is happening in real time. Maribel didn't see it. She had her back to the doors. But I saw it. And I saw Gage Huxley see it. Gage went white. He grabbed Maribel's arm with both hands now. "Move," he said. "Now." He practically dragged her down the hallway, her heels clicking rapidly, a frantic, disjointed rhythm compared to her confident entrance. My parents followed, Dorian casting one last hateful look at Francis, Celeste refusing to look at me at all. We stood there in the hallway as they retreated. I felt the adrenaline begin to crash. My knees felt weak. Francis turned to me. He put his hands on my shoulders. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. "Did you see her phone?" Francis asked. I nodded. She was confirming something, or sending something. Francis looked down the hallway at the retreating figures. She wasn't texting. Francis said, he held up his own phone. He showed me the screen. He had the Cobalt Ridge beneficiary app open. It was a read-only version we had been given access to just that morning. There was a red banner across the top. Alert multiple failed authentication attempts. Biometric override requested. She is trying to brute force the accounts. Francis said, she knows she lost the legal claim. She is trying to move the liquid cash before the bank gets the court order. She thinks she can wire it out to an offshore shell before the system locks down. I stared at the screen. That was why she was smiling. That was why she said she had nothing to lose. She was going to rob the estate. "We need to tell Silas," I said, turning back toward the courtroom doors. Francis shook his head. "Silas knows. Why do you think he didn't come out here?" I looked back through the glass. Silas Mercer was standing by the clerk's desk. He was on his phone. He was looking at a laptop screen that the clerk had turned toward him. He wasn't packing up. He was working. "He is tracking it," Francis said. "He is letting her do it. Why?" I asked. "Why let her steal it?" "Because," Francis said, his voice hard. "Attempted theft is a crime, but successful wire fraud across state lines. That is a federal felony. Silas isn't just defending the money. Ivera, he is building the cage." I looked back down the empty hallway. My family was gone, but the war wasn't over. It had just moved from the courtroom to the servers. "Let's go," Francis said. "We need to get to the car. If she is desperate enough to try this here, inside a courthouse, she is desperate enough to do anything." He took my hand. His grip was firm. The rain in Caldwell Point did not wash things clean. It just made everything look like it was made of cold iron and gray slate. We had barely cleared the revolving doors of the courthouse, stepping into the biting drizzle of the parking lot, when my phone vibrated against my palm. It wasn't a text message. It was a haptic pulse, a specific, urgent rhythm that I had learned to recognize only in the last 3 weeks. I stopped next to the passenger door of our aging Volvo. The screen lit up, cutting through the gloom. Security alert. The notification read, "Beneficiary portal, access blocked. Multiple failed authentications." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It started at the base of my neck and crawled downward. My sister, Maribel, had not gone home to cry. She had not gone to a bar to drown her sorrows. She had gone to her phone. Francis saw my face. He didn't ask what it was. He saw the glow of the screen and the way my thumb hovered over the glass. He unlocked the car, and we got inside, shutting out the wind but trapping the tension in with us. The smell of old leather and damp coats filled the small space. "Read it," Francis said. He didn't start the engine. I tapped the notification. It opened the secure messaging app from Cobalt Ridge. Attempted login detected at 10:42 in the morning. I read aloud. Source IP identifies as mobile device iPhone 15 Pro Max. Location, within 1 mile of Briarwick County Courthouse. Status failed. Action account locked. 10:42. That was 4 minutes ago. That was while we were standing in the hallway. That was while Maribel was looking me in the eye and telling me I didn't know who I was messing with. Francis didn't curse. He didn't slam the steering wheel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. He dialed a number from memory. It was the emergency fraud line for the trust. He put it on speaker and set it on the dashboard. The ringing sound filled the car. 1 ring, 2 rings. "Thank you for calling Cobalt Ridge Trust and Fiduciary." A voice said. It was smooth, synthetic, and utterly indifferent. "For security purposes, please be advised that this call is being recorded and may be used for voice print identification." Francis looked at me. "This is the weapon." His eyes said, "The recording. This is Francis Glenbrook." He said clearly, "Calling on behalf of beneficiary Ivera Clearfield. Security code Alpha 9 Victor 7. We are reporting an active intrusion attempt." There was a brief pause, the sound of keys clicking on a keyboard on the other end. Then a human voice came on the line. It was a woman, her tone brisk and professional, the voice of someone who dealt with panicked rich people all day and remained unimpressed. "Mr. Glenbrook?" The agent said. "Identity confirmed. We see the alert on our board. We have 3 failed password attempts on the main beneficiary portal in the last 120 seconds. 3, I whispered. She tried 3 times. The system locked the account automatically after the 3rd failure. The agent continued. "However, we are seeing a secondary request coming through the automated recovery system." "What kind of request?" Francis asked. His voice was sharp. "A request to reset the multi-factor authentication method." The agent said, "The user is attempting to bypass the email verification and route the security code to a new phone number. They are answering the security questions correctly. Mother's maiden name, name of first pet, high school mascot." I closed my eyes. Of course she knew the answers. She was my sister. We grew up in the same house. She knew our mother's maiden name was Vance. She knew our first dog was a golden retriever named Barnaby. She knew we went to Caldwell Point High. She wasn't hacking the code. She was hacking the history. "She is trying to social engineer the reset," Francis said. He looked at me, and I saw the realization hit him. "She isn't trying to access the account to check the balance. Ivera, she is trying to change the lock so you can't get in. She wants to seize control of the dashboard before the court order processes the freeze. If she gets in, she can transfer the liquid assets." I said. My voice sounded hollow in the car. "She can move the cash to an offshore account in seconds. The request is pending approval." The agent said, "Do you wish to authorize the change of the 2-factor phone number ending in 8841 number?" Francis said, "Absolutely not. That is a fraudulent request. The beneficiary is sitting next to me. We are authorizing a hard freeze." "Understood," the agent said. "Initiating Protocol 0. No changes to email, phone number, physical address, or banking coordinates will be accepted without in-person verification at a Cobalt Ridge branch with 2 forms of government identification." I breathed out, "Protocol 0. It sounded like a military term. In a way, it was. We were in a war zone, but the bullets were data packets and the trenches were server farms. "I am placing a fraud hold on the account," the agent said. "The interface will show a generic error message to the intruder. We do not want them to know we have identified them. We want them to keep trying so we can log the attempts." "Wait," Francis said. He leaned closer to the phone. "You said she tried to add a new phone number. Did she try to change anything else?" There was a silence on the line. I could hear the faint hum of the agent's breathing. Yes, the agent said. There was a pending modification to the profile contacts. Before the lockout, the user attempted to add a co-signatory for notifications. A secondary authorized party, who I asked. Who would she add? My father, Gage Huxley. The name entered was Julian Vane. The agent said. I frowned. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard of a Julian Vane. It sounded like a character from a romance novel. Smooth and fictitious. Julian Vane. I repeated. I don't know anyone by that name. Francis went very still. His hand froze halfway to the volume knob. He looked at the dashboard as if he could see through the plastic and wires into the dark heart of the cellular network. Julian Vane. Francis repeated, Are you sure that was the spelling V-A-N-E? That is correct. The agent confirmed. Associated with an email address at a domain called nevisglobalsolutions.com. Francis let out a short, harsh breath. He looked at me, and his expression was grim. Ivera, he said. That isn't a person. What do you mean Julian Vane isn't a guy Maribel met at a cocktail party? Francis said. He pulled a notebook out of his jacket pocket. He always carried one and flipped it open. I remember reading about a Julian Vane in a compliance report last year. It's a nominee name. A nominee name. It is a placeholder, Francis explained. A straw man. There are services in states like Nevada and Wyoming, and countries like Nevis, that provide directors for shell companies. If you want to open a bank account but you don't want your name on it, you hire a nominee. Julian Vane is a professional signature. He doesn't exist. Not really. He is a legal fiction used to shield the real owner from liability. I stared at him. Maribel wasn't just trying to steal the money. She was trying to wash it. She was trying to move it into a structure where no one, not me, not the judge, not the IRS could find it. She's moving fast. I said, How does she even have a nominee ready? You don't just set that up in 5 minutes in a hallway. She didn't set it up today, Francis said darkly. She has had this ready. She probably uses this Julian Vane structure for her own business. She was just trying to link the trust to her existing escape route. He turned back to the phone. Ma'am, Francis said to the agent, please flag that name. Julian Vane, and the domain Nevis Global Solutions. That is a known nominee service linked to high-risk offshore entities. This is not just a family dispute. This is an attempt at structured money laundering. Noted, the agent said. Her voice had lost its robotic edge. She sounded alert now. I am elevating this report to our compliance officer immediately. We will generate a suspicious activity report. I realized then what Maribel had done, in her arrogance, in her desperate need to win. She had made a fatal error. She had introduced a criminal element into a civil trust fund. She had invited the federal government into her living room. Ms. Clearfield, the agent said, I need you to verbally confirm the directive. Do you authorize us to block all access and route all future communication through your legal counsel? I leaned toward the dashboard. I looked at the rain sliding down the glass, blurring the world outside. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of how careful he had been. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me a fortress. And Maribel was breaking her fingernails trying to scratch through the steel walls. I authorize it. I said clearly. My voice did not shake. Block the portal, freeze the assets, and send a full log of these login attempts, including the IP address and the Julian Vane request, to Judge Vance's chambers and to my attorney, Rowan Keene. Confirmed, the agent said. The logs will be time-stamped and digitally signed. They will be admissible in court. Is there anything else? No, Francis said. Just keep the line open. If she tries again, I want to know. We are watching, the agent said. Goodbye. The line went dead. The silence returned to the car, but it felt different now. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a hunter who has just found fresh tracks in the snow. Francis sat back in his seat. He looked at the phone, then at me. She is desperate, he said. You don't use a nominee like Julian Vane unless you are trying to hide something big. She isn't just trying to take your grandfather's money, Ivera. She is trying to cover a hole in her own finances. I nodded slowly. It made sense. The quiet luxury, the desperate need for immediate probate, the panic when the trust appeared. Maribel wasn't just greedy. She was underwater. We need to save this email, I said. Francis was already forwarding it to a secure server he maintained for his engineering firm. Done, he said. It's backed up in 3 places. My phone buzzed again. Not an alert, an upload notification. The folder my grandfather had named in case of emergency had updated. Target identified. The new file read, Location Riverton Hollow, Asset Storage Unit 4B. Francis's eyes flicked to the screen. That's where Elias and Brenda live, I said. The cousins. He started the engine. The old Volvo rumbled to life, a comforting, mechanical sound. He turned on the wipers, and the gray world of the parking lot snapped into focus. She thinks she is being clever, Francis said, shifting the car into reverse. She thinks because she has an iPhone and a contact in Nevis that she can outsmart a system built by paranoid bankers. He looked at me. She just handed us the smoking gun. Ivera. She left her fingerprints on the digital door handle. I looked at the courthouse looming behind us through the rear window. It looked like a tombstone in the rain. Where are we going? I asked, though I already knew. Francis pulled out of the parking spot, the tires splashing through a puddle. We are going to confirm the rest of the story, he said. Maribel is trying to rob the bank. We need to go find out why she is so broke she has to steal from a dead man. He turned the car toward the highway. Riverton Hollow, he said. Storage Unit 4B. I touched the folder on my lap. The paper felt cool under my fingers. The legal thriller part of the story was finished. The courtroom doors were closed. But out here, in the rain and the data streams, the real revenge was just beginning. My grandfather had left a paper trail, but Maribel had just started leaving a digital one. And unlike paper, digital trails never really burned. They just led you deeper into the dark. I watched the city of Caldwell Point slide past the window. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness. And I had the best seat in the house for the collapse of the Clearfield dynasty. Drive, I told Francis. He drove. The wipers of the Volvo slapped back and forth, a rhythmic metronome counting down the seconds of our escape. We were 5 miles out of the courthouse parking lot, merging onto the gray, slick pavement of the interstate that led toward Riverton Hollow. When the screen of the phone mounted on the dashboard lit up again, it was not a text message. It was not a security alert. It was a video call request. The caller ID was a simple, stark logo, a stylized mountain ridge in deep blue. Cobalt Ridge, Secure Comms. Francis glanced at the phone, then at the road. He tapped the accept button. The screen filled with the face of Silas Mercer. He was not sitting in a car. He was back in the small, wood-paneled office inside the courthouse that the clerk had evidently commandeered for him. Behind him, I could see stacks of files. He looked exactly as he had in the courtroom, pristine, unruffled, and utterly detached from the human chaos he was orchestrating. The lighting was fluorescent and harsh, but it didn't seem to affect him. He looked like a high-definition image of the law itself. Miss Clearfield, Silas said. His voice came through the car speakers, clear and devoid of static. Mr. Glenbrook, I am contacting you on this secure line to clarify the position of the trust regarding the events of the last 15 minutes. I leaned toward the dashboard. Mr. Mercer, I said, we saw the alert. She tried to hack the account. Silas did not nod. He did not shake his head. He simply blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. I am aware, he said. We have logged the attempt, but I'm not calling to discuss the mechanics of the breach. I am calling to discuss the consequences. He looked down at a document on his desk, then back at the camera. I need to make one thing very clear to you. Miss Clearfield, Silas said, Cobalt Ridge does not take sides. We do not care about family feuds. We do not care about who was the favorite child or who cried at the funeral. We care about the document. We stand on the side of the terms. And the terms have just been violated in a way that triggers a specific and rather unique clause. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Was he talking about me? Had I done something wrong by leaving what clause? I asked. Silas picked up the third envelope. It was the one he had not opened in court. The one that sat on the judge's desk like a silent threat while Maribel was screaming. Your grandfather, Arthur Clearfield, was a man who understood leverage. Silas said he knew that the no contest clause was a standard legal deterrent, but he also knew that for someone like your sister, someone accustomed to bending reality to fit her desires, the threat of simply losing money might not be enough. She might gamble. She might think she could outspend the trust in litigation. Silas tapped the envelope with his index finger, so he added a secondary layer. Silas continued, It is technically known as a moral hazard or ethics trigger clause. In lay terms, it is a behavioral trap. I looked at Francis. He was listening intently. His eyes narrowed on the road. The clause states, Silas read from the paper in front of him, that should any beneficiary attempt to access, seize, or manipulate the assets of the trust through fraudulent means, including but not limited to digital intrusion, identity theft, or the filing of motions containing knowingly false statements, their status does not just revert to zero, their allocated portion is immediately redirected. Redirected, I asked. Redirected where? Back to the general pot. Back to me, no, Silas said. And this is the specific genius of Mr. Clearfield's design. He knew that if the money came to you, Maribel would spend the rest of her life hating you. She would hunt you. She would sue you every year until she died. He wanted to ensure that her anger would be directed at a target she could not touch. Silas looked directly into the camera lens. If the forfeiture is finalized, Silas said, Maribel's 50% share of the estate, which is valued at approximately $12 million, will be liquidated. The funds will be transferred irrevocably to the Clearfield Homefront Fund. I stared at the screen. The Clearfield Homefront Fund, I asked. I have never heard of it. It does not exist yet, Silas said. It is a charitable entity that will be formed automatically upon the triggering of this clause. Its sole mandate is to provide mortgage-free housing and rehabilitation support for retired first responders, EMTs, firefighters, and paramedics in the Tri-County area who have been injured in the line of duty. I sat back in my seat. I felt the air leave my lungs. My grandfather hadn't just cut her out. He had humiliated her. Maribel hated common people. She hated the noise of sirens. I remembered a dinner party 3 years ago where she had complained for 20 minutes because an ambulance had blocked her driveway while attending to a neighbor's heart attack. She had called them inconsiderate. She had called them clutter. And now, her inheritance, the money she thought would buy her a villa in Tuscany and a seat on the museum board, was going to build houses for the very people she looked down on. She won't be able to control it, I whispered. Precisely, Silas said. She will not sit on the board. She will not get a plaque. Her name will not be on the building. The money will simply vanish from her world and appear in the bank accounts of injured paramedics in Caldwell Point every time she sees a fire truck. She will know it is driving on her tires. Every time she sees an ambulance, she will know she paid for the gas. It was cruel. It was perfect. Francis let out a low sound that might have been a laugh if the situation weren't so tense. It is brilliant, Francis said. If the money went to Ivera, Maribel could claim she was robbed by a greedy sister. She could play the victim, but she can't attack a charity for injured firefighters. She can't go on television and say, that money should be mine, not the man who lost his leg pulling a child out of a burning building. It traps her in silence. Silas nodded. Correct. Mr. Glenbrook, it weaponizes her own snobbery against her. If she sues the fund, she commits social suicide. If she stays silent, she stays poor. But what about my parents, I asked. Dorian and Celeste, they were there. They sat behind her. They are currently under review, Silas said, his voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. The trust views the filing of the motion by Mr. Huxley as a coordinated action. Your father's affidavit supporting Maribel's false claims of isolation make him a party to the attempt. Silas turned a page in the file. The ethics trigger clause applies to all beneficiaries, he said. If the court finds that Dorian and Celeste Clearfield conspired to facilitate this fraud and the video logs from the storage unit might very well prove that then their stipends are also subject to the same redirection, the entire estate could end up housing half the fire department of Oregon. I looked out the window. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the trees into gray smears. I thought about my father, Dorian, who prided himself on his legacy. He talked endlessly about the Clearfield name. He wanted buildings named after him. He wanted statues. Now, the only legacy he might leave was a row of sensible, affordable duplexes for people who actually worked for a living. Ivera, Francis said softly, do you understand what your grandfather did? I nodded slowly. He didn't divide the money based on who was his child. I said, he divided it based on who was a human being. Francis gripped the steering wheel. It is more than that, Francis said. He turned morality into a financial instrument. He made it expensive to be a bad person. Silas's voice cut back in. We are preparing a supplemental declaration to be filed with Judge Vance within the hour. Silas said, it will include the logs of the failed login attempts, the IP tracking data, and the request to add the nominee, Julian Vane. We are formally notifying the court that the ethics trigger has been potentially activated. Potentially, I asked. We need the judge to rule on the sanctions, Silas said. Once he declares the motion was frivolous, which he has practically already done, the forfeiture becomes absolute. The money moves, the accounts close, and Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes becomes a spectator to her own bankruptcy. Silas paused. For the first time. He leaned closer to the camera. His gray eyes seemed to bore through the screen. Miss Clearfield, he said, I need you to understand the gravity of the next 2 hours. Your sister knows this is happening. She may not know the specific destination of the funds yet, but she knows the walls are closing in. That is why she is trying to access the offshore channels. She is trying to outrun the algorithm. Is she dangerous? I asked. Desperation is always dangerous, Silas said. That is why you are going to Riverton Hollow. You are going to the physical evidence. The digital evidence is my jurisdiction. The physical evidence is yours. How did you know we were going to Riverton Hollow? Francis asked sharply. We didn't tell you. Silas didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. A microscopic breach in his professional armor. Mr. Glenbrook, Silas said, the car you are driving is leased by the trust. The phone you are holding is billed to the trust. I know exactly where you are. I suggest you keep driving. The storage unit contains the final piece of the puzzle. It contains the why. We know what she is doing. We know how she is doing it. But the storage unit tells us why she needs the money so badly that she would risk prison for it. The screen went black. The call ended. The silence rushed back into the car. But it wasn't empty silence. It was filled with the hum of the tires and the realization of the scope of the trap. Francis exhaled a long breath. The Homefront Fund, he said, shaking his head. He really hated her, didn't he? No. I said. I looked at the dark phone screen. He didn't hate her. He just knew her. He knew that taking the money wasn't enough punishment. He had to take away her sense of superiority. He had to force her to watch her inheritance do good in the world. That is the only thing that would truly break her heart. Francis signaled right, taking the exit for Riverton Hollow. The town was a crumbling industrial spur, a place of rusted warehouses and cheap storage facilities. Miles away from the manicured lawns of Caldwell Point, it was the kind of place where people hid things they didn't want the neighbors to see. I thought about the 30% of the story I hadn't seen yet. We knew Maribel was greedy. We knew she was manipulative, but Silas was right. Greed doesn't make you hire a nominee like Julian Vane. Greed doesn't make you try to hack a trust fund inside a courthouse. Fear does. What is in the storage unit? I asked. Francis stared at the road. The rain was turning into a downpour. The reason she is broke, Francis said, and probably the reason she is going to jail. We drove into the shadows of the underpass, leaving the light behind. The legal battle was over. The moral battle had been won by a dead man's claws. Now, All that was left was the excavation of the rot. Riverton Hollow was not where you went to hide a fortune. It was where you went to hide a mistake. The district was a grid of corrugated metal warehouses and chain-link fences, situated under the overpass, where the interstate rumbled overhead like prolonged thunder. The rain here didn't wash the grid away. It just turned it into a gray paste that coated the tires of the Volvo. Francis pulled up to the gate of ironclad storage. The keypad was rusted, and the security camera mounted on the pole was buzzing with a frantic, dying mechanical sound. It was the kind of place that accepted cash payments and didn't ask for a second form of identification. I reached into my purse and pulled out the keychain my grandfather had given me 3 days before he died. There was a small, brass key on it, labeled only with the number 4B. At the time, I thought it was for an old filing cabinet or a safe box in his study. I didn't know it was the key to his command center. Francis typed in the code my grandfather had texted me months ago, a code I had assumed was a wrong number at the time. The gate groaned open. We drove through the maze of orange doors until we found Unit 4B. It was unassuming. It looked like every other door in the row. But when I slid the key into the padlock, the mechanism turned with the smooth, heavy click of expensive engineering. This wasn't a $5 lock from the hardware store. It was a high-security, hardened steel shackle. Even here, amidst the rust, he had ensured nothing could be forced. Francis helped me roll the door up. It rattled loudly, echoing in the wet afternoon. I expected to see old furniture. I expected to see boxes of grandmother's china or dusty holiday decorations. Instead, I saw an archive. The unit was outfitted with industrial metal shelving. On the shelves were white banker's boxes, stacked with military precision. They weren't labeled with contents like kitchen or books. They were labeled with dates and categories. Calls October to December, bank letters flagged, the notary attempt, shareholder proxy bids. In the center of the room, on a small folding table, sat a ruggedized external hard drive and a stack of FedEx shipping labels. It wasn't a storage unit, it was an evidence locker. Francis stepped inside, wiping the rain from his face. He looked around, his engineer's eyes scanning the organization. He knew, Francis said quietly. He didn't just suspect they would come for him. Ivera. He built the case against them while he was still making them tea. I walked over to the box labeled the notary attempt. I pulled the lid off. Inside, sealed in plastic document protectors, were printouts of emails. I picked up the top one. It was dated November 10th, 2 days before the bathroom incident. It was an email from Maribel to a private email address I didn't recognize. But the subject line made my blood run cold. Urgent voting rights transfer, Clearfield Logistics. I read the body of the email. He is failing fast. Maribel had written, "We need to get the signature on the proxy transfer before the quarter ends. If I don't control the voting block by January, the board will vote to audit the accounts. I need that notary ready. Does Lawton do house calls after hours?" I handed the paper to Francis. She wasn't just trying to get his money. I said, she was trying to stop an audit. Francis read it, his jaw tightening. "Clearfield Logistics," he said. "That is the family shipping subsidiary. Maribel has been running it for 3 years. If she is afraid of an audit, it means the books are cooked. She needed your grandfather's voting shares to block the investigation." He put the paper down and picked up another document. This one was a financial consulting contract between Clearfield Logistics and a company called Nevis Global Solutions. There it was again, the shell company. "Look at the signature," Francis said. I looked. At the bottom of the contract, dated 6 months ago, was my grandfather's signature. Arthur Clearfield. It looked perfect. Too perfect. Francis reached into the box and pulled out a sheet of transparency film. My grandfather had prepared it. On the film, he had traced his own genuine signature from his driver's license. Francis laid the transparency over the contract. It matched perfectly. Every loop, every line, every tremor. "That is impossible," Francis said. "No one signs their name exactly the same way twice. There is always a microscopic variation. The only way you get a 100% match is if you trace it or copy-paste it digitally." He held it up to the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It is a forgery, Frances said. A digital forgery. She took a scan of his signature from an old check and pasted it onto this contract to authorize payments to her shell company. She's been siphoning money out of the logistics company for months, paying herself consulting fees to Nevis. I felt a wave of nausea. Maribel stood in court in her quiet luxury clothes, judging me for my cheap blazer, acting like the responsible matriarch. Meanwhile, she was nothing more than a common embezzler using Photoshop to rob her own family. And grandfather knew. I whispered, "He didn't just know." Frances said, moving to the table with the hard drive. He tracked it. Francis plugged the ruggedized drive into his laptop, which he had brought from the car. The screen glowed blue in the dim light of the storage unit. He opened the file directory. It was a forensic goldmine. There were folders for everything: audio logs, security cam backups, metadata snapshots. Francis opened a folder named PDF Analysis. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen. He opened a file. It was a report generated by a digital forensic tool. It analyzed the metadata of the power of attorney document Maribel had tried to submit to the bank, the one she claimed grandfather signed months ago. Document created November 12, 2025. The report read, Author Maribel C.R., Software Adobe Acrobat Pro, Modification History Signature Layer added November 14, 2025. She added the signature 2 days after she tried to break down the bathroom door. Frances said, she failed to get him to sign it in person. So she went home and forged it. But she was sloppy. She didn't scrub the metadata. She left a timestamp that proves the document was altered after the date it was supposedly executed. He looked at me. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. Ivera, this is wire fraud. This is forgery of a legal instrument. This is 20 years in federal prison. I looked away from the screen, my eyes landing on the stack of FedEx labels on the table. There was one receipt taped to the surface. It was for a package sent 2 weeks ago. Recipient, the law offices of Whitman Associates. Destination Stonehaven City, Washington. Instruction, do not open unless instructed by Cobalt Ridge Trust. Stonehaven City, that was 3 hours north of here. It was a different jurisdiction. Why send it there, I asked. Why not to Silas? Because Silas is the trustee. Frances said, he handles the money. Whitman Associates, that is a criminal defense firm, or in this case, a special prosecutor's liaison. He tapped the receipt. Your grandfather set up a dead man's switch. Ivera? He sent the physical originals of these proofs, the forgery analysis, the audio tapes, the transparency overlays to a third-party lawyer in another state. If Maribel managed to destroy the evidence here, or if she managed to corrupt the judge in Caldwell Point, the package in Stonehaven would be released to the FBI. I leaned against the cold metal shelving. The scale of it was terrifying. My grandfather had sat in his armchair, drinking tea, watching old movies with me, all while orchestrating a multi-state legal entrapment operation against his own daughter. He gave her every chance. I said softly. He never submitted it while he was still breathing. He held on to it. He let her grieve him first. He gave her room to leave. Frances gave a small nod. But she didn't leave, he said. She walked into court and painted you as unstable. And then she ended her own life, all at once. The storage unit's hush shattered an incoming ringtone. It wasn't my phone. It was a flimsy, prepaid cheapie sitting right on top of the calls box. I stared at it. Who was dialing a dead man's burner pickup? Frances said, I took it. A local number glowed on the screen. I hit the green button and lifted it to my ear. I stayed silent. Hello. The voice on the other end splintered thin. Scared. Uncle Arthur? Is anyone there? I knew that voice. Elias, the cousin from Riverton Hollow, the one who'd stood at the back of the courtroom like set dressing. Elias, I said. My tone was ice. Arthur's dead. You know that. You were at the hearing. There was a gasp on the other end. Ivera. Oh, God. Ivera. I didn't know you had this phone. Why are you calling? Elias, I asked. I need to tell you something. He stammered. He sounded like he was crying. Or maybe he was drunk. Probably both. I can't do it. I can't go back to court. Can't do what she promised me. Elias sobbed. Maribel. She said if I just stood there, if I just signed the affidavit saying Arthur was crazy, she would pay off the truck. She said she would clear the lien on my house. She said it was just a formality, that the insurance would cover it. I looked at Francis. He was recording the call on his own phone. She bought you. I said, I have debts. Ivera Elias cried. You don't know what it's like. They were going to take the house. She came to me with cash, $10,000 in an envelope. She said there was more coming once the trust was broken. And now I asked. Now she's not answering her phone. Elias said. I called her. I saw what happened in court. The judge, he said we could go to jail. Ivera, I can't go to jail. I have kids. You should have thought about that before you sold your grandfather's dignity for a pickup truck. I said, please, Elias begged. If I recant, if I tell the judge the truth, will you help me? Will you tell them I was coerced? I gripped the phone. I felt a surge of anger. But then I remembered the Clearfield Homefront Fund. I remembered the paramedics. I remembered the people who actually deserved help. I am not the one you need to talk to. Elias, I said, you need to call the district attorney, and you need to do it before Maribel throws you under the bus to save herself. Because she will. You are just a line item to her. But I hung up. I put the burner phone back on the box. He is scared. I told Francis. Maribel cut off contact. She isn't paying them. Francis closed the laptop. Because she can't. He said, she is locked out. Her assets are frozen. She can't pay the bribe she promised. He looked at the boxes. This is it, Ivera. This is the end of the line. We have the forgery. We have the embezzlement scheme. We have the witness tampering. And we have the time-stamped metadata that proves it was all premeditated. He picked up the hard drive. We need to get this to Silas, he said. And then we need to get it to Judge Vance. I looked around the storage unit one last time. It was cold and damp, smelling of rust and secrets. It was a lonely place for an old man to spend his final months. I imagined him here, sorting papers, scanning documents, building this fortress of cardboard and bytes to protect me. He didn't just leave me money. Francis paused at the door. No, he said. He left you the truth, and in a family like yours, that is the most expensive thing of all. We rolled the metal door down. The lock clicked shut. We got back into the Volvo. The rain was still falling, but the road ahead seemed clearer now. We weren't running anymore. We were delivering the payload. Maribel had tried to buy a story. She had tried to buy witnesses, lawyers, and narratives, but she forgot the one rule my grandfather lived by. You can buy a lie, but you can only rent the truth, and the lease had just expired. Let's go, I said. Francis put the car in gear. We turned back toward Caldwell Point. The hunt was over. It was time for the sentencing. The drive back from Riverton Hollow was quiet, but the silence did not last long. We thought we had left the war behind in the storage unit. Locked away with the rusted padlocks and the damp concrete, we were wrong. We had simply moved from a battlefield of paper and servers to a battlefield of whispers. Maribel realized she could not win in the courtroom. Judge Vance had shut that door. She realized she could not win in the bank accounts. Silas Mercer and the Cobalt Ridge algorithms had bricked that wall. So she did the only thing a socialite in Caldwell Point knows how to do when the walls close in. She weaponized the community. It started the next morning. I was in the break room at Orchard Line Risk Lab, staring at the coffee machine, when I felt the shift. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a cessation of conversation when I walked in. Two colleagues near the window stopped talking mid-sentence. They looked at their mugs. They looked at the floor. They didn't look at me. Then came the summons. My manager didn't come to get me. The director of human resources did. She stood at the door of the lab, holding a folder that looked uncomfortably similar to the ones Maribel's lawyer had used in court. Miss Clearfield, she said. Her voice was professional, detached. We need to have a conversation. I followed her to the glass-walled office on the 4th floor. I sat down. She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. We received an anonymous complaint this morning. The director said, "It concerns a potential conflict of interest regarding your access to sensitive financial data here at Orchard Line and your involvement in external litigation." I looked at the paper. It was an email. The sender was concernedcitizencaldwell@gmail.com. "I think you should know that Ivera Clearfield is currently under investigation for elder abuse and financial manipulation of a vulnerable senior." The email read, "She coerced her grandfather into changing his will while he was mentally incapacitated. Is this the kind of person Orchard Line trusts with client risk assessments?" I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't shame. It was fury. Maribel couldn't get the judge to believe the lie. So she was trying to get my boss to believe it. She wasn't trying to win the lawsuit anymore. She was trying to starve me out. "This is false," I said. My voice was steady. "This is a harassment tactic from a family member who was just cut out of a trust fund." The director sighed. She looked tired. "Look, Ivera, I believe you. But this was sent to the ethics board. Not just me. We have to open a file. We have to investigate. Until it is cleared, I have to place you on administrative leave. Paid, of course, but you need to hand in your badge." I stood up. I took the plastic badge off my belt. I placed it on the desk. "Tell the ethics board to check the court records in Briarwick County." I said, "You will find that the only person under investigation is the one writing these emails." I walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I walked out with my head high because I knew exactly what this was. It was a siege. I called Francis. He picked up on the first ring. "She went for the job." I said, "I know." Francis said, his voice was hard, "She went for the neighbors, too." "What do you mean?" "Check the local forums." Francis said, "Or don't. Actually, don't. It is better if you don't see it." I checked anyway. The Caldwell Point community page was buzzing. There were threads about the Clearfield tragedy. Anonymous accounts were spinning a tale of a lonely old man and a granddaughter who isolated him, drugged him, and rewrote his legacy in the dark. They didn't use my name directly, but they used enough details that everyone knew: the quiet sister, the one who works at the lab, the one who never came to the galas. Maribel was trying to turn the jury of public opinion against me because she knew the real jury would hang her. I met Francis at the law office of Rowan Keene. Rowan was my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had known my grandfather for 20 years. She looked at the printout of the anonymous email and the screenshots from the forum. "This is defamation," Rowan said. She threw the papers onto her desk. "It is textbook. She is trying to poison the well. It is working." I said, "I just got suspended." Rowan picked up her phone. "Then we stopped playing defense," she said. She drafted a notice immediately. It wasn't a polite letter. It was a legal warhead. It stated that any further communication, direct or indirect, that disparaged my character or the validity of the trust would be added to a motion for a protective order. It cited the no contest clause. It cited the pending sanctions. We sent it to Gage Huxley. 10 minutes later, Gage replied, "My client denies any involvement in these third-party communications." Gage wrote, "Of course she denies it," Francis said, pacing the small office. "She didn't write them. She hired someone to write them, just like she hired the notary, just like she hired Julian Vane." That name hung in the air. Julian Vane, the nominee, the ghost. Francis had been digging, while I was getting suspended. He had been running the phone number associated with the Julian Vane account, the one Maribel had tried to add to the portal. "I found the link," Francis said. He opened his laptop and turned it toward us. "The phone number isn't a burner," he explained. "It is a voice-over IP line registered to a company called Obsidian Holdings, LLC. "And who owns Obsidian Holdings?" Rowan asked. "It is a blind trust registered in Wyoming," Francis said. "But look at the recovery email for the admin account." He pointed to a tiny string of text in the corner of the screen. "Billing at clearfield-logistics-group.com. I stared at it. She used her work email. I whispered, "She used the company email to set up the shell company she is using to steal from the family trust." "She is sloppy," Francis said. "She is arrogant. She thinks because she hides the owner's name." No one will look at the billing contact. Rowan smiled. It was a shark smile. This connects the dots, she said. It proves that the Julian Vane attempt wasn't a hacker, it was Maribel. And since she used the logistics company resources, she just dragged her own business into the blast radius. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I looked at Rowan. She nodded. Answer it, she said. Put it on speaker. I tapped the screen. Hello, Miss Clearfield, a voice asked. It was smooth, polished, aggressively friendly. This is Marcus Thorne from Sterling Image Partners. I didn't say anything. I knew that name. Sterling Image was a crisis management firm. They were the people you called when you got caught laundering money or having an affair with the senator. How can I help you? Mr. Thorne, I asked. I am calling on behalf of a mutual interested party. Thorne said. He was dancing around the name. We understand there is a sensitive family situation unfolding. The narrative is getting a bit out of hand, isn't it? The forums, the workplace issues. It is all very messy. Get to the point. I said, my client is willing to make it stop. Thorne said, all of it. All? The emails, the posts, the complaints, they can all disappear. We can even issue a retraction statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. We can restore your reputation at Orchard Line by the end of the day. And the price I asked, the price is a signature, Thorne said. A simple settlement agreement. You agree to withdraw the sanctions motion. You agree to unfreeze the portal for a 24-hour window. Just enough to handle some administrative transfers. Then you can have the rest. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. She wants me to open the door. I said, she wants me to let her loot the account. And in exchange, she will stop lying about me. We call it a reputation management agreement, Thorne said. I looked at Francis. He was shaking his head. I looked at Rowan. She was writing down the time of the call. Mr. Thorne, I said, you are asking me to conspire to defraud a federal trust. You are asking me to help your client violate a court order. I am offering a solution, Thorne said. The alternative is that the story gets worse. We have contacts at the state paper. Do you really want your grandfather's medical history on the front page? I felt a surge of adrenaline. They were threatening his memory now. Mr. Thorne, I said, this call is being recorded by my attorney, and you just attempted to blackmail a witness in an active investigation. I suggest you call your client and tell her that the price just went up. I hung up. Rowan looked at me. Good, she said. We add that to the pile. The pile was getting high. An hour later, Silas Mercer called. He didn't use video this time. His voice was brisk. I have filed the declaration, Silas said. The judge has the logs. He has the IP address. He has the Julian Vane request. And he has the connection to the logistics company email that Mr. Glenbrook discovered, and the protective order Rowan asked. Judge Vance signed it 10 minutes ago. Silas said. It is a blanket restraining order. Maribel Clearfield Rhodes, Dorian Clearfield, and Celeste Clearfield are legally barred from contacting any financial institution, real estate broker, or insurance carrier associated with the estate. If they walk into a bank, the police will be called. They are locked out. Francis said, completely. Silas confirmed. And there is more. The judge has reviewed the ethics trigger clause. He has reviewed the evidence of the fraudulent motion. And I asked, he has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Silas said, he isn't waiting for the standard calendar. He wants this finished. He has ordered all parties to appear, and he has specifically requested that Maribel bring her personal devices for forensic imaging. She won't do it. I said, she will destroy the phone. Let her. Silas said, if she destroys the phone, she destroys her only defense. We have the server logs. If the client-side data is missing, it is an admission of guilt. Spoliation of evidence. It is an automatic loss. Rowan's computer chimed. A new email. She clicked it open. Her eyebrows shot up. Well, Rowan said, look who is trying to find the exit. She turned the screen toward us. It was an email from Gage Huxley to the judge's clerk. Carbon copy to us. Subject notice of withdrawal of motion, Your Honor, regarding the petition filed yesterday. My client wishes to withdraw the motion voluntarily. We believe this is a private family matter that can be resolved without further court intervention. We apologize for the inconvenience. She is trying to pull the plug. Frances said, she knows the hearing tomorrow is a trap. She wants to walk away before the judge can drop the hammer. Rowan typed a quick reply. Objection, she muttered as she typed. The motion cannot be withdrawn after evidence of fraud has been submitted. The trust demands a ruling on the sanctions. She hit send. You can't rob a bank and then say, never mind when the cops show up. Rowan said, she is stuck in the room with us. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't the PR firm. It wasn't the HR director. It was a text from my mother. Ivera, please, this has gone too far. Maribel is hysterical. She says they are going to arrest her. Dad is calling the governor, but no one is picking up. Call off the dogs. We can talk. We can give you the house. Just stop the hearing. I stared at the message. We can give you the house. As if the house was theirs to give. As if they still thought this was a negotiation. They didn't understand. They still thought this was about leverage. They didn't realize it was about gravity. You can't negotiate with gravity once you have stepped off the ledge. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and sent it to Silas. Add it to the log. I typed, Francis put his hand on my shoulder. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked. I looked at the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a heavy, bruised purple. I thought about the rumors spreading through the town. I thought about the people whispering my name. I thought about my grandfather hiding in his bathroom. They tried to take my job. I said, they tried to take my name. They tried to take my history. I stood up and picked up my coat. I am not just ready. Francis, I am looking forward to it. Tomorrow wasn't just a hearing. It was the closing argument of a 100-year life. My grandfather had written the script. I just had to deliver the final line. Maribel wanted a story. She wanted to control the narrative. Fine, we would give her an ending she would never forget. Let's go home, I said. We have a big day tomorrow. We walked out of the office. The town of Caldwell Point felt different now. The buildings looked smaller. The quiet luxury looked cheap. The power had shifted. It wasn't in the country clubs anymore. It was in the stack of papers in Rowan's briefcase and the hard drive in Francis's bag. The hunt was over. The trap was sprung. Now, we just had to watch them realize they were caught. The air in the Briarwick County Courthouse had changed overnight. Yesterday, it had smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Today, it smelled of ozone and impending lightning. The courtroom was the wood paneling, the fluorescent lights, the seal of the state of Oregon hanging high above the bench, but the players had shifted positions on the board. My sister, Maribel Clearfield Rhodes, sat at the defense table. She was wearing a navy blue suit today, sharper and more severe than the beige camel coat she had worn yesterday. She had pulled her hair back into a tight chignon. To the casual observer, she looked composed, the very picture of a wronged heiress waiting for a clerical error to be corrected. But I knew her. I saw the way her fingers were twisting a gold ring on her right hand, turning it round and round until the skin underneath must have been raw. Her eyes were not scanning the room with the imperious boredom she usually projected. They were fixed on the double doors at the back of the room, wide and unblinking, like a deer watching for headlights. My parents, Dorian and Celeste, were not sitting in the front row today. They were 3 rows back, leaving a distinct, visible gap between themselves and their daughter. They were distancing themselves from the blast radius. Gage Huxley, Maribel's lawyer, looked like a man who hadn't slept. He was shuffling papers on his desk, but he wasn't reading them. He was just moving them around to give his hands something to do. At exactly 9 o'clock, the side door opened. Judge Vance walked in. He did not look at the docket. He did not look at the clerk. He looked directly at Maribel. "Please be seated," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it had a weight that made the wooden benches creak as we all sat down simultaneously. "We are here for an emergency hearing regarding the sanctions motion and the status of the Arthur Clearfield Trust." Judge Vance said, "I have reviewed the filings submitted late last night by the trustee. He turned his gaze to the back of the room. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "please step forward." The double doors opened. Silas Mercer entered. He was wearing the same black suit. He had the same impassive expression, but he was not carrying a single thin envelope this time. He was carrying a binder. It was thick, bound in heavy black plastic, and tabbed with color-coded markers. He walked to the clerk's desk with the rhythm of a machine click, click, click. He placed the binder on the judge's bench. "Good morning, Your Honor," Silas said. "This is the supplemental declaration from Cobalt Ridge Trust and Fiduciary. It contains the certified server logs from yesterday, the IP tracking report, and the identity verification failure report regarding the attempted access of the beneficiary portal." Judge Vance opened the binder. He flipped through the pages. The sound of the turning pages was the only noise in the room. "Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes," the judge said, without looking up, "yesterday, you stood in this courtroom and listened to me warn you about the consequences of contesting this trust. You heard me explain the forfeiture clause." Maribel stood up. Her voice was steady, but it was thin, like glass about to shatter. "Your Honor," she said, "I did not contest it. We withdrew the motion. My lawyer sent the email." Judge Vance looked up. He took off his reading glasses. "You withdrew the legal motion." "Yes," the judge said. "But according to this report, 17 minutes after you left my courtroom while you were still standing in the hallway of this building, you attempted to log into the Trust's secure portal." "I was just checking the status," Maribel said quickly. "As a beneficiary, I have a right to see you attempted to reset the two-factor authentication." The judge cut her off. "You tried to reroute the security codes to a new device, and you attempted to add a co-signatory to the account." The judge looked at the page. "A Mr. Julian Vane, associated with a company called Obsidian Holdings." Maribel went pale. The name hit her like a physical slap. She hadn't realized we knew the name. She thought the system had just crashed. She didn't know the system had been watching. Gage Huxley stood up. "Your Honor, if I may." My client was confused. She was under extreme stress. She was merely trying to ensure that her contact information was up to date. "This is hardly a crime. It is a technical error." Judge Vance looked at Gage. "Mr. Huxley," the judge said, "do not insult my intelligence, and do not insult the intelligence of the deceased." The judge motioned to my table. Ms. Rowan Keene, my attorney, stood up. She walked to the center of the room. She held a flash drive in her hand, the one Francis and I had retrieved from the storage unit in Riverton Hollow. "Your Honor," Rowan said, "the defense claims this was a technical error. They claim it was a spontaneous act of confusion. We have evidence to suggest otherwise. We have evidence that establishes a pattern of premeditated fraud dating back 6 months." Rowan placed the drive on the clerk's desk. "This drive contains the metadata analysis of the power of attorney document Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes attempted to use at the bank," Rowan said. "It proves the signature was digitally forged 3 days after Arthur Clearfield refused to sign it. It also contains the email correspondence regarding the hiring of the mobile notary, Mr. Lawton, specifically for an after-hours coercion attempt." Maribel griped the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. "And," Rowan continued, her voice sharp and clear, "it contains the corporate registration documents for Obsidian Holdings. The registered agent is a nominee service in Nevis, but the billing email for the account is linked directly to the corporate server of Clearfield Logistics, the company owned and managed by the defendant." The courtroom gasped. It wasn't a theatrical gasp. It was the sound of air being sucked out of the room as the pieces clicked together. Rowan turned to look at Maribel. "Julian Vane isn't a person, Your Honor. It is a laundering vehicle. Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes wasn't trying to update her contact info. She was trying to wire $12 million into a shell company before this court could issue a freezing order." Gage Huxley sat down. He didn't argue. He didn't object. He collapsed into his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He knew it was over. He couldn't defend this. This wasn't a probate dispute anymore. It was a felony in progress. Judge Vance looked at Maribel. His face was hard, etched with a disappointment that went beyond the law. Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, the judge said. Is this true? Maribel didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stared at the judge, her mouth opening and closing silently. Silas Mercer stepped forward. Your Honor, Silas said, the trust does not require a criminal conviction to act. We operate based on the terms of the instrument. Silas opened the binder to the last tab. Article 9, Section 4. Silas read, the ethics trigger. It states that if a beneficiary attempts to seize assets through fraudulent means, their interest in the trust is immediately forfeited. He looked at Maribel. The trust considers the attempt to bypass security protocols and the use of a falsified nominee as a hostile and fraudulent act. Therefore, as of 8 o'clock this morning, the trust has executed the forfeiture. Maribel's head snapped up. What she whispered. Judge Vance nodded. The court recognizes the authority of the trustee. The forfeiture is upheld. Maribel looked around the room, her eyes wild. You can't do that, she screamed. Her voice broke, shrill and jagged. That is my money. I earned it. I ran the company. I took care of the family. You can't just take it. It is not your money, Silas said calmly. It never was. It was a gift, and you just rejected it. Where does it go? Maribel demanded. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Does she get it? Is that the plan? You give it all to the failure, to the one who never did anything. Silas looked at her with eyes that were cold and gray and absolutely merciless. No, Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, Silas said. Miss Ivera Clearfield does not receive your share. He paused. He wanted her to hear this. He wanted her to feel it, per the specific instructions of Arthur Clearfield. Silas said, the forfeited funds totaling $12,400,000 have been wire transferred to the newly formed Clearfield Homefront Fund. Maribel froze. The name clearly meant nothing to her. The fund, Silas continued, is a charitable organization dedicated to providing housing and medical rehabilitation for retired and injured first responders in Briarwick County. I watched the realization hit her. I saw the color drain from her face until she looked like a wax figure. First responders, the people with the loud sirens, the people who blocked her driveway, the clutter. You gave my money to paramedics, she whispered. Silas nodded. And firefighters. He added, they are breaking ground on the first housing unit next month. It will be located directly across the street from your country club. Maribel made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire worldview collapse. She wasn't just broke. She was going to be the punchline of the town. Every time she looked out the window of the club she could no longer afford. She would see the legacy of her own greed. Judge Vance banged his gavel. The forfeiture is recorded, the judge said. Now, regarding the sanctions. He looked at Gage Huxley. Mr. Huxley, you filed a motion without due diligence. You allowed your client to perjure herself in my courtroom. You are hereby fined $50,000, and I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association for review. Gage put his head in his hands. As for you, Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, the judge said. Maribel stood up. She was shaking. She looked like she was going to run. I am leaving, she said. I am done with this. You can keep the money. I am leaving. She turned and started to walk toward the aisle. She walked fast, her heels clicking on the floor, trying to outrun the humiliation. Mrs. Clearfield Rhodes, the judge barked. Sit down. She didn't stop. She reached for the gate, but she didn't get to the door, because the door opened before she could reach it. Two men in gray suits walked in. They were not bailiffs. They were not court clerks. They were carrying leather portfolios, and they had badges clipped to their belts. Maribel stopped. She backed up a step. Are you Maribel Clearfield Rhodes? One of the men asked. She nodded. Mute. The man handed her a stack of papers. They were thick. They were heavy. You are being served, the man said. Served with what Maribel whispered. This is a subpoena from the district attorney's office, the man said, and a notice of investigation from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Maribel looked at the papers. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading, asking how this had happened. We didn't call them. Maribel. I thought you called them. The man continued speaking, his voice carrying to the entire room. We are investigating a series of wire transfers between Clearfield Logistics and a shell entity known as Obsidian Holdings. The man said, and we have questions regarding the identity of a Mr. Julian Vane. Your attempt to link that entity to the Arthur Clearfield Trust this morning triggered a federal money laundering alert. I heard my mother gasp in the back row. My father stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. He knew. He saw the ship sinking, and he was the first rat off the deck. Maribel stood there, holding the papers. She looked small. The quiet luxury suit suddenly looked like a costume. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. She wasn't the matriarch anymore. She was just a defendant. Judge Vance watched the scene with a grim expression. The court is adjourned, the judge said. He stood up and walked out. Silas Mercer closed his binder. He picked it up. He walked over to my table. He didn't smile, but he nodded at me. It is done. Miss Clearfield, Silas said, the assets are secure. The transfer is complete. Thank you. Silas, I said. He turned and walked out, the black suit disappearing through the doors, the ghost of my grandfather finally at rest. Rowan packed up her briefcase. Francis stood up and buttoned his jacket. We walked out of the courtroom. We walked past Maribel. She was sitting on the bench now, staring at the IRS subpoena. She didn't look at me. She didn't say a word. She was trapped in the silence she had tried to impose on everyone else. We walked down the long marble hallway, the same hallway where she had threatened me yesterday, the same hallway where she had tried to hack the account. It felt different now. It felt clean. We pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The rain had stopped, the clouds were breaking, and a shaft of pale winter sunlight was hitting the wet pavement. I took a deep breath. The air tasted cold and sharp. It tasted like freedom. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the urge to cheer. I just felt a profound, quiet relief. My grandfather hadn't wanted me to destroy my family. He had wanted me to survive them. And to do that, he had taught me the hardest lesson of all. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with water. You fight it with cold. Hard facts. You don't scream. You don't cry. You just wait for the moment, and you lay the paper down. Francis took my hand. It's over, he said. I looked at the sky. No. I said, it's just starting. Because across the street, in the reflection of a shop window, I saw myself. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the quiet sister. I was Avera Clearfield, and I had a lot of work to do. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Maribel's downfall. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Juliet Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.